Sushant, Serene, I don't trust the Chinese one bit, but what has been announced is significant, coming as it does before the BRICS summit were to start. And that naturally always provides an opportunity because the principals are to meet. China wants this meeting to go through, and therefore they need to now go back. From all that we've heard from the foreign minister, the foreign secretary, from Gaurav and from others, what have you understood? Are we genuinely back to where things were before April, May 2020? Has China actually pulled back, or are we finding a diplomatic halfway house?
Rahul, I think first and foremost, you forget China, you don't trust anybody. You don't trust the Americans, you don't trust the Brits, you don't trust anybody in international relations, regardless of what you might say publicly. On the other issue, look, I think we are still, there are conflicting reports coming. There are some reports which say that yes, patrolling has been allowed, but there is the force levels are going to stay what they were. So yes, you could go up to the patrolling points, but the forces are not being disengaged right now. Maybe that will happen in a stage-wise kind of a thing. There are other reports which say that even in the areas which had been settled earlier or some agreement had been reached, patrolling again and where buffer zones of sorts were created, there would be patrolling out there. So there are various kinds of reports which are coming out, so there's no real clarity. What will it mean? Clearly, the fact that you have announced this on the eve of the BRICS summit, I would be surprised if a meeting now does not take place. But it is possible that, the diplomats are trying to get some kind of a much more substantive agreement, which both the President and Prime Minister Modi can probably announce in one way or another. And pending that, whether a meeting does take place or not, I don't know. But I would not be surprised if a meeting was to take place. Does this mean that tensions have come down? Certainly. Does this mean that the Chinese are trying to, cool things down? Maybe they sense an opportunity because suddenly, at least in the public discourse, relations between India and some of the Western countries are on a bit of a slide, and maybe the Chinese think that this is a time to make an overture towards India. We don't know. So as of now, let's face it, I think there is a lot more darkness than there is light.
Okay, General Narasimhan, from your military understanding of what's been put out in the public domain, what's your best sense in terms of what the Chinese and the Indian sides have actually agreed to? Is this a genuine military diplomatic victory for India, or are we now just finding a halfway house to ensure that we can somehow set up the atmospherics for a bilateral between Xi and Modi?
Good evening, and thank you, Rahul, for having me on your program. This is something which is really a positive movement that has taken place. For the last almost 4.5 years, we have been actually negotiating with the Chinese, and we are stuck to our guns that unless this is getting some kind of resolution, we are not going to progress the relations on the other sides, other aspects. So that is something which is we need to keep in mind. Second thing is, we always talked of a 3-step process: a disengagement, a de-escalation, and subsequently the de-induction to the permanent locations. This is probably the first step that is getting completed at this point. In fact, the agreement as per the EAM, and he spoke in that NDTV program, he talked about the agreement being signed today. So obviously, it is going to be put into place in some time, and it is going to take some time to actually ensure that things have taken place on ground. Coming on the eve of the BRICS summit, which is taking place at this point in time, I think there's a good sign, and there may be, in fact, the Foreign Secretary also in his briefing did not rule out a meeting between Mr. Modi and Mr. Xi Jinping. It could very well take place, but I am not sure whether it is going to take place a bilateral one or it is going to take place on the sidelines of the BRICS summit. However, I think this is a good sign, and I think we are nearing the completion of the first step of the 3-step process that we have set out to resolve the issue that came up in 2020.
Colonel Ajay Shukla, you've been one of the people who's been pushing back against the government very strong on Depsang and Demchok. What do you make of the announcements today? What are you satisfied with? What would you be highly concerned about?
Rahul, thanks for calling me on the show. I still remain a skeptic on this entire issue. on whether there is an agreed disengagement and mutual withdrawal on the LAC, for the simple reason that China has still to make an announcement.
Yeah.
We have the Indian side saying that we've got an agreement and so on and so forth. In the Chinese websites that I've seen, the Ministry of National Defense.
Why do you think that's the case? But surely Jaishankar and Vikram Mishri are strong practitioners of the diplomatic craft. They wouldn't make this announcement unless we actually had an agreement.
Oh, well, I would sort of counter that. I would say that the Prime Minister should be even more responsible. But he got up and he made a statement saying that na koi ghusa hai, na koi ghusne denge, and so on and so forth. So there have been a lot of fast ones, if I may call it, that have been spoken around this. And the fact remains that when you have an agreement, especially between India and China, if it's an agreed sort of stage that you have reached, then there is a joint statement or at least a synchronized statement issued from both the capitals. But we have India right now, playing it as if there has been a sort of full withdrawal, and the Chinese are...
Sushant Sareen, does that surprise you that we've got the Foreign Minister and the Foreign Secretary both coming on record saying that we've entered into this agreement? There isn't a formal word so far from the Chinese side.
No, it doesn't really surprise me, in the sense that, yes, the skepticism which Ajay is expressing is something that other people have also expressed. But the simple thing is that I don't think that either the Foreign Minister or the Foreign Secretary would be coming out and declaring something like this unless something had been already agreed. Now, maybe the Chinese are waiting for the, I's to be dotted and the T's to be crossed, or whatever the expression is. Maybe they are waiting for that. But it's difficult to say. But I would be extremely doubtful that, somebody will come out and make a statement like this without anything substantive already having been decided.
I'm joined also by Andrew K.P. Luing. He's a top China strategist and analyst from Hong Kong. Mr. Luing, thank you for joining us. Can you share with us the Chinese assessment of this agreement? India's Foreign Secretary, Foreign Minister, both making public declarations today. We haven't heard from the Chinese side, making us wonder what's really going on here.
Well, let's face it, this is not an aberration. Both leaders, President Xi of China and Prime Minister Modi, had months before indicated their joint intention to de-escalate. Now, let's look at this kind of agreement on patrolling. It is not a solution for the long-term border disputes between the two countries. It's unlikely to resolve the border disputes, and it's also unlikely to clearly define the problematic line of actual control. But it is a major step in de-escalation, coming as it from the official statements, at least from the Indian side. But it also significant that this breakthrough, even though it's relatively limited step, happens on the eve of a major BRICS summit, where Prime Minister Modi and President Xi are attending. And this reflects the significance of the increasing influence of the Global South, of which the BRICS summit is, of course, a very important platform. And I think that Prime Minister Modi probably figured out that in this space with the Global South, it's better to have a normal, a more stable relationship with China, rather than allowing both sides to fight each other with no end in sight.
So let me build on that thought bubble and zoom out for a moment, because so far we were discussing what was happening on the line of actual control between the PLA and the Indian Army. I now want to look at what's happening at the geopolitical level. So you've got a situation where Russia and China seem to be on one end of the global spectrum, the United States and its allies on the other. India, which is so far seen as a strategic ally of the US, has been at loggerheads with the United States over Khalistan, over support of Khalistani terrorism within the US and with China and Australia and the UK for that matter. And you've got the war between Israel, the Hamas, Palestine and Iran. And then in the midst of this, you've got this BRICS summit where India and China, two important pillars of the BRICS, were so far, frankly, at loggerheads. I mean, China wanted business to go on. India said there can't be business as usual till the time we have this confrontation. So, Sushant Sareen, in that larger spectrum, how do you see this reorder the global high table? We're in some kind of rough weather with the US and Canada at this moment over Khalistani terrorism. We're pushing back hard over there. And now you've got Xi Jinping agreeing, from what we've gathered, to something which so far the PLA wasn't willing to do.
I don't think we should read too much into it. Look, I don't think we are going to destroy our relationship with the United States and with the Western countries simply over, this fracas which we are having with them on Khalistan issue, unless, of course, it becomes bigger than what it already is. That is one part of it. The other part of it is, I don't think that just because we have a partial kind of an agreement with the Chinese on the border, tensions are coming down, that, Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai will once again become lexicon, will become part of our lexicon. That's not going to happen. The world is in a flux. Frankly speaking, forget about the 3 or 4 of us or 5 of us in your panel right now. I don't think anybody in the world really knows which direction the world is going to go to. Everybody is hedging their bets. India is hedging its bets. The Chinese, the Russians, everybody is hedging their bets. Everybody is jostling for space. And we don't know how this cookie is going to crumble. There are just too many unknowns, both known unknowns and unknown unknowns that are in play right now. So what we are trying to do is everybody is trying to tread this very treacherous kind of geostrategic space, very, very cautiously, trying to build up options, trying to have certain leverages, trying to have, some kind of fallback positions. But nobody really knows what the world 10 years from now is going to look like.
No, but in that sense, Colonel Shukla, would you concede that this is India walking the diplomatic trapeze with a high level of sophistication? Because if the United States and countries like Canada think that there is no option but being aligned with the Anglosphere, then India's optionality is very limited. The moment DC feels that, okay, there is Beijing, there is Russia, and India can as much be a part of the global South ecosystem and yet remain very happy, it increases India's leverage on the global high table.
Rahul, there's no doubt about what, for example, Sushant said just now, that we are playing on a sort of a very uneven surface. We are dealing with a lot of unknowns, but that is standard diplomacy for big nations, especially big nations that are trying to change the status quo in the world and assume a bigger name for themselves and a bigger role for themselves. At the end of that, you cannot turn around and say, oh, things are not looking good at all, and everything that's going wrong is ascribable to other people. That's not how diplomacy is done. Diplomacy is all about shaping the playing field. It's all about carving out a bigger role for yourself. It's all about making friends with the right people and confronting the wrong people. I think we've just become too used to blaming somebody else, starting from Jawaharlal Nehru, for everything that is going wrong. I would say that it would be better to take a sort of a more stable, a more sort of realistic view of the world, and to just continue carving out the place for yourself.
General Narasimhan, from a military perspective, do you see the Chinese actually pull back their troops? Because what happened, I just want to remind our viewers, is that post-Galwan, a lot of fortifications, new army positions were built out, including semi-permanent infrastructure, which didn't exist earlier. Do you see that now as being the de facto new normal, or do you see potentially as part of this de-escalation and disengagement process that some of those troops which were moved to the frontier areas will be pulled back?
Before I answer that question, just one line on what was being discussed earlier on the geopolitical scenario. I think India has been able to navigate this, the international scenario, which is in a flux, very well, actually speaking, so far. Going forward, I think we need to be careful. Even on this issue, which the agreement was signed today, we need to be careful and cautious, because if you listen to Dr. Jaishankar in that NDTV program, he was cautious about the whole thing.
Yeah.
So my point is this. First is, when you say disengage, that doesn't mean you're going to go back to your barracks straight away tomorrow. It is not going to take place immediately. It is going to take on a step-by-step basis. And it may pull back a little bit. Troops may pull back a little bit. There were issues regarding the winter patrolling, etc., which was being discussed in the social media. All those things will come into play. But if you are expecting everybody to just go back and settle back into the barracks overnight, it is not going to happen. That is point number one. Point number two, you also mentioned about the various infrastructure development that is taking place on the Chinese side. Like 2 days ago, you found 70-odd barracks being constructed 36 kilometers from where the LAC is, behind Pantung Lake. So those things are going to be taking time to resolve. That is why I said the first phase, first step of this entire resolution process of the 2020 has just taken place. It has got no relevance, like Mr. Andrew mentioned. It has got no relevance to the overall resolution of the boundary question. That is going to come back much later. So what we have been insisting as a preliminary step to go back to a sense of normalcy is what has been signed today. So now we have to get into discussions on the de-escalation part, in which the majority of the forces that came into these areas are going to go pull back further. And then the third step is going to be the de-induction. So we have still a long way to go. This is a good step, but this has to be pursued, and this has to be followed with the other steps that
Andrew Lewin, do you want to give us a sense of the thinking in China at this moment? Is this just very tactical because President Xi, Prime Minister Modi were to be together at BRICS, do just about enough to ensure that a bilateral can take place? Or do you think because the Chinese economy has been in flux, growth rates are down, you've got a real estate bubble that you're dealing with, there's also talk of unemployment, etc., and therefore China now saying there's no point in continuing with this antagonistic approach towards India and dialing back on some of the pressure tactics. So is this just tactical for the moment, or do you think there's a strategic change of mind?
So, are you asking me, sir?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, I don't think it is a temporary tactic at all, because we haven't seen this kind of breakthrough, even though it's only on patrolling, but it really as a milestone modus operandi that could de-escalate a lot of the causes for border conflicts. And what's happening now is that, of course, President Modi finds it also advantageous to have this kind of rapport with the Chinese, even though the border disputes are not going to be resolved outright. They are going to remain, as I said at the beginning, for a very long time. But at least the relationship is now put on a more even keel. And the importance is why now is because it's happening right on the eve of a very important platform involving the Global South. As I try to highlight the point, I think that in President Modi's calculation, and being on less confrontational terms with China, of course, whose influence in the Global South is quite large, would open up more space for India to play in the dynamics of the Global South. So I don't think it's got anything to do with American politics or changing the kind of approach of Indians' independent policy, being not tied to Americans' chariot or playing along with the United States all the time, but still maintaining a very close relationship with the United States, but also carving out Indian separate policy vis-a-vis Russia, and of course now with the Global South.
Okay, here's what I wish to say as we conclude. The manner in which the Modi government has pushed back against the pressure tactics from the PLA has been quite remarkable. The Indian Army has matched the PLA troop for troop along the LAC to the extent that we could with the resources that we have. We've tried to build infrastructure along the line of actual control in an area which was highly neglected in the past, and we haven't yielded to pressure tactics. The government's pushed back in Galwan, we saw physically, but even otherwise. pushed back through deployment on the ground. And while I don't trust the Chinese at all, if this does go through in the manner in which it's been announced, it would reflect a very significant diplomatic and military victory for India in terms of pushing the bully back and telling him where he gets off. Let's just for the moment see whether or not it actually pans out in the way that it's been said. But as one of our guests remarked, it's far from being Hindi, Chini, bhai bhai. We can't fall into that trap. Trust but verify really is the way to go. Sushant Sareen, Kanwal Jai Shukla, General Narsimhan and Andrew Luing for joining me on the NewsTrack. Thank you very much. We'll track the BRICS summit very closely. Heightened interest now, given that the stage is set for this bilateral. It wouldn't have been announced today if behind the scenes preparations hadn't already been made for a President Xi, Prime Minister Modi bilateral, not since the swings in Sabarmati, the walk around the temple, or what happened in Xi'an in China, have we had a high-profile bilateral, even if it's on the sidelines of a multilateral summit. So it'll be very significant. We've got boots on the ground tracking what happens, and we'll bring you all the coverage right here on India Today.